Hi, I'm M.
And my name is Bea.
And this is
Fangirls Anonymous. A quick warning, this podcast is not for kids.
We get into some pretty explicit stuff.
But if you're still with us and into that, welcome.
Bea!
Hey, Em.
How's it going, man?
It is going pretty okay. How about you?
I'm feeling good today.
Are you excited?
I say that every episode, and I didn't want to say that I was excited, but I am. I have no idea what we're actually getting into, because we've made this, like, you explaining something to me kind of episode, and that made me a little nervous, because I like to, control things sometimes.
You like to be in the loop on the planning committee?
Control is a little bit too much of a harsh word, but yes, I am actually intrigued and excited to get into what we're talking about today, of which I have no information. I'm trusting you implicitly, Bea.
Okay, all right. Are you ready to learn? We are talking about the fandom trope of Hanahaki, which I'm gonna just give you a definition right off the bat. For those of you in the know, you immediately went, that. Hanahaki refers to a trope in which character A has some form of deep and intense love for character B, and because they do not think it is requited, or it appears to be not requited, they catch this magical disease called Hanahaki, which means that they start coughing up flowers. And if they don't tell the person they love that they love them, and there's some corollaries to that, they will choke to death on flowers and die. And this comes in a variety of variants. I have some of the ones that I am familiar with, just to kind of give a flavor.
Is this kind of like magical realism?
So this trope could be considered a form of magical realism because, in my experience, nobody really explains the whys or hows of the flowers, and we can talk about variations on how this gets put into world building, or even just variants on how the rules of it work. But what I mean by magical realism is, in this particular case, and I'm using a more fandom tailored definition rather than a literary definition here, but no matter what the setting of your fic is, if it inhabits the rules of the world of canon as everyone understands it, or if it's an AU, everything proceeds along those rules except for this one magical thing, which everybody still follows all the other rules of the world except for in this one little thing. So in this case, in Hanahaki, if you have it in a Voltron fic that is canon compliant, it follows canon rules. There's space, there's aliens, there's this other form of sort of alien magic, and Hanahaki is some other thing that exists in this world that doesn't necessarily have to be explained by any of the other canon, and everybody continues to follow all the other rules of the world. So
like, it's just part of the fabric of their reality.
Yeah.
And also magical realism can be shady. Like, what if it was a world that real magic existed and then our society kind of grew around it? Or there's dragons and they're little, or people have familiars.
Yeah,
so you would consider Hanahaki as kind of part of that genre of trope?
Yeah, Hanahaki is the only thing that it is a self-contained step outside of the normal rules. Everything else continues on as is. And that's
very cool.
It's part of why it's a trope that's pretty easy to kind of insert into an AU or into a canon, because it just exists as a thing, and that's the only thing you need to change.
Well, I will say I've never heard of this. What kind of flowers do they throw up?
So it depends. Sakura blossoms, even though they're technically from a tree and not a flower, are quite popular, or at least traditionally they were, which has a lot to do with where it came from. But flower language is actually employed a lot usually. Most fics that I've read that employ this have the authors spending a lot of time and effort matching certain meanings to what flowers they cough, and it can be metaphorical, it can be symbolic.
Is it used in a lot of, like, anime ships?
Absolutely. In fact, that's where
I have never heard of it, and I don't. Well, I mean, with a name like Hanahaki, seemingly yes, it would come from anime in Japan.
Yeah.
But I have never heard of it, and I tend to read a lot of Western fan fiction. So, Western characters anyway. Interesting. This is cool. Like, do you know of any, like, particular flowers that people love? Like, I'm sure roses are a thing, but the stems, man.
different flavors. Different colors of roses are quite popular, but I've actually haven't
Oh,
seen any specific trope, not even within a single fandom. It really is dependent on what the author thinks is appropriate symbolism for that relationship. And as far as the stems, that's an interesting point you bring up, because not every version of Hanahaki is the same. In fact, the broad stroke definition I gave you, where it is unrequited love and coughing up flowers, is pretty much the only consistent thing about it.
kind of
So
like ABO.
yes, exactly like that.
Ooh,
Because, like you said, one of the reasons why roses could be kind of popular is because roses have thorns, and if you eventually get to a point where you are coughing up thorns, you have a big problem.
that's prime hurt comfort territory right there.
Absolutely. But not every version of Hanahaki does that. Especially with the artwork, a lot of it is just petals. But I've seen some frameworks where you have sort of this, as the disease progresses, you get bigger, more complete flowers rather than just petals. The point that you actually get a whole flower is about when you're going to die, for dramatic symbolic purposes.
And it's a lot more uncomfortable, I'm sure, for the person
Yes,
choking up a flower.
exactly. There are other versions where you actually, they describe it as flowers are actually growing in your lungs.
Oh
And
my
so
god.
it's you're only coughing up petals, but there's other medical problems going on.
Wow. So it's like
Uh,
realistic flowers in your body, kind of. Like, it's not like,
yeah,
oh,
it's
I
a
have
little.
butterflies in my stomach, cough, cough. It's like, whoa, the plant is growing in you, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a little body horror-y, which I think is part of the appeal of the trope to a certain extent, is this juxtaposition between this thing of beauty, this love, and then also this sort of horror element. But interestingly, one of the other very different things is how you are cured of the disease. Again, there's different versions of it. The bare bones of it is you have to tell the person you love that you love them. And sometimes it's just that you have to gather the courage to do it, and then usually it's a happily ever after. But a lot of the time there's a consequence if it's unrequited. Like if you love them but you confess it but then they don't, then it's basically an insta kill.
Oh my
You're
god.
dead. The end. So that is, I think, put there in to make it so that over the course of the story they hold out as long as possible to tell them. There's a slightly different set of consequences that usually only occurs in the more, and I'm gonna have some quotes here, science-y fandoms. So sci-fi fandoms or more modern setting fandoms. There's sometimes a option for surgery of some kind that will remove the Hanahaki, but this also usually comes with consequences. I've
It's like
seen,
removing their heart or something.
yeah, there's a version where if you do that, then you lose your ability to feel love.
Oh my gosh. I was watching Felicity, this show from the 90s. In the middle of the second season, there's this amazing episode where they kind of like, they're doing the Twilight Zone, but Felicity, and it's all black and white, and it's just lovely. And the first 30 minutes of the episode is dedicated to Felicity, the main character, getting kind of bullied by this clinic who eventually takes her heart out and she can't love anymore. That really reminded, what we're talking about reminded me of that episode. But yeah, like, what is up with writers constantly wanting to talk about, like, though our heart is heavy, it's a good thing to have, basically. I think that's cool.
It's interesting because this trope didn't originate in the West even a little bit. I mean, like you said, the name Hanahaki, it's obviously Japanese. Where it actually came from, as far as my research can find, which I would love for anybody who knows more about it to contact us, because there is actually not a ton about it to be found. So, according to fanlore, the first known usage of Hanahaki is from a manga called Hanahaki Otome, or The Girl Who Spits Flowers, which was written in 2009. But
That young? This feels
yeah,
like an old thing.
yeah, I thought it was older too. Supposedly, it had variations, or some of the symbolism and themes did exist in some of the more Asian media fandoms, or at least Asian media before the manga, but
Mhm.
there was no information on what that might be. And as somebody who does not speak any languages from that part of the world. I would love to hear anybody who has evidence of perhaps where this might have come from before the manga.
Yes, please contact us at mmbpresents@gmail.com.
So the word Hanahaki is a portmanteau of the words hana, which means flower, and hakimasu, which is a verb which means to spit or throw up. So it's very literal.
Yes, it is.
So that manga was the first known, but based on my own research, the actual earliest fic that I could find that used the word Hanahaki or even really used some of the same symbolism and like mechanism of storytelling was actually a fic from the Patan Boys, and I'm very sorry for mispronouncing that, BTS fandom. It's called Unrequited by Resonae, and it was written in 2014, which is a decent amount of time after that original manga. And I also looked on fanfiction.net just to make sure that I wasn't missing anything. And on that one, the oldest that referenced Hanahaki was, that I could find anyway, was a fic called Close Your Precious Eyes and Just Realize I'm Still Fighting by Mist469 in the Naruto fandom. I feel like it's pretty telling right off the bat that both of those fandoms are Asian media fandoms, and if you look through some of the oldest, they actually do tend to be in the Asian media fandom for quite a while. So it's interesting because it diffused out from there, and I was introduced to it through Western fandoms, but
Yeah, I was about to ask, did you find anything that was involved with like Western characters?
if you go into a lot of the mega fandoms, it goes in there. So I've seen it in Avengers, I've seen it in Merlin.
It's Merlin who has the flowers, right?
I think it depends on how they
Oh.
world build around it.
Is it kind of like red blue a little bit? Like who doesn't have the flowers and who does? Like it's very specifically one person, or it's either? Do you find
It
that?
tends to be either, and I've also seen it be
Oh.
both. In fact, both is kind of a popular addition. This trope feels a lot more like it's basically just we want a physical ailment to describe the pining.
Yeah, it's kind of like tattoo soul marks a little bit, but
There are two really big sets of tropes that I think play in that are definitely older tropes, but they feel like they're connected to me that I would love to discuss. One of which is the soulmate tropes, because most Hanahaki, in fact, every Hanahaki story I've ever read, not everybody in the population is affected by this disease. It is a quote unquote random affliction. It isn't passed along, it's not contagious, it just pops up.
that's like part of the like main idea of the trope, that it's a random
And
affliction.
yes, it's never even hinted that there's some kind of like someone must be more in love than someone else sort of a thing. It's literally
Oh.
completely random. So, because it is quote unquote random, and because you're often having it happen one character A from your ship to character B in your ship, it feels very much like a soul mark because it's these two
Yeah.
people have been chosen to be bound by this disease, kind of irrespective of their own wishes.
I just had a thought. Would you consider this a crack trope? And if so, would you consider it a crack trope within Japanese fandom? Because to me, as a Westerner, I have a very specific perspective. This trope doesn't feel as cracky when it's within the context of a Japanese fandom or a Japanese fic, but it feels more cracky in a Western fic.
There's certain, I think, symbolic elements that mesh better with me, a Westerner's understanding of the East here, and it just makes more sense if it's in an anime, because I think in a lot of respects animes take these wild premises and sort of make these deeply emotional stories about them anyway.
Yeah.
I see how there's a little bit of a disconnect with Western fandom because it doesn't quite match up a lot of times with, in particular, like the way we use language, just the inherent symbols in how we write and speak. But I've never seen it done humorously, and I've never seen it done in a way that isn't, every time I read it, it feels sort of wholehearted. Like, even if it's kind of
It's earnest.
goofy, nobody's trying to use it as a silly premise. We're just asking you to take a much larger step of disbelief than you would in perhaps an anime fandom. So it could be considered crack, I guess, but I don't personally. It tends to be hurt comfort pretty much. I have never
Oh,
read
okay.
anything that was not cut and dry hurt comfort. I would argue that Hanahaki falls firmly into two camps. One is a hurt comfort with a heavy dose of pining, and the other is tragedy.
Oh my god. Is there a lot of tragedy involved?
Uh, Not in what I read, so
Oh,
I
okay.
don't feel like I'm a great judge of that. If you pin me to the wall and ask me, I would say it's probably a 75-25 split of happy ending, bad ending.
Really? That's a
So,
lot.
yeah,
25% is a lot.
it is. It is definitely nice, though, sometimes if you've read 3 or 4 and you're like, of course they're gonna get together, they would never kill them, and then they die, and you're like, oh,
That's ultimate hurt comfort. They
yeah, it
actually
really
die.
is.
A good romantic death scene. Chef's kiss.
One of the things I like about Hanahaki is, well, it does have some really good hurt comfort, and it can be very cut and dry. I've read some very on trope sort of fic that just it follows a formula, it's very satisfying. But
The words on trope needs to be a t-shirt right now. Anyway, go on.
the thing that I actually like about it are the fics that break the mold and therefore discuss some really interesting things about the way the trope works and the way we perceive relationships. There are actually 2,
Hmm.
maybe 3 fics that I think are worth discussing. So the first one I'm going to talk about is from the Witcher fandom. It is called Rosemary for Memory by Kaio Nohimi, and it is one that does end tragically.
Ooh, I
It's
love tragic Jurassic.
Yeskier, and he has Hanahaki for Geralt.
Yes. Yes, that tracks.
And
And
he
he
does
wasn't he named Dandelion in the books or something?
yeah, he does everything in his power to not let Geralt know about this because he's 100% sure that it's unrequited.
No.
Until at the end, Geralt does find out, but it is way too late and he ends up dying. And Geralt, being Geralt, feels super guilty about this. But the thing that's interesting about it is that there is a discussion between him and Yennefer about the fact that Dandelion was just like going along living his best life, knowing that he was going to die because Gerald didn't love him in this fic. And even if
What?
he had said it, he would have been lying and it wouldn't have helped. So
Ah.
it doesn't preclude the possibility that he could have fallen in love with him at some point, only that at that moment he didn't. And there's something interesting to have a fic discussing the fact that this other party isn't obliged to love this other person. Geralt
Okay.
is not obliged to love Yeskier the way that Yeskier loves him, nor is he responsible for the fact that Yeskier ends up dying.
It's not taking away somebody's autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. I actually really like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting take. It's super tragic,
Yeah.
but
It's not Geralt's fault.
no.
I really like that.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, which leads me to another fic that I thought also had a really interesting take on it. Again, in the Witcher fandom, it is called Fill My Lungs with Sweetness by WednesdaysDaughter. And it's again Geralt Yeskier. But in this one, WednesdaysDaughter put a lot of work into building a reason for Hanahaki. It's this curse that this witch has been spreading, and it's one of the ones where if you tell your love and they don't return your love, you instantly die.
Hmm.
And this is something that happens to Yeskier's sister. So the witch
Oh,
kind of like
it's
curses him.
genetic.
The witch, he goes hunting down this witch and ends up kind of getting cursed twice. So when he gets Hanahaki, it's bad news.
Wait, Geralt gets it?
No, Yeskier.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Now, the interesting part about this, the formula breaking part, is that Geralt does eventually end up finding out about it. And his solution, because this is, I believe, post-Dragon Hunt, to proving that he does actually love Yeskier, is that he goes and finds this witch and is like, okay, now you gotta curse me too, so that I can prove with beyond shadow of a doubt that I also really love him.
With the flowers?
Yes.
Oh.
Which
That makes me happy.
again, it's a really interesting take on it because it's somebody who this wasn't a random occurrence, that they went out of their way to get cursed and were using it as this physical proof of their love.
If it wasn't Geralt, that kind of would be a little creepy.
I would argue that it's kind of stupid because
Yeah, it's stupid. Yeah.
it's sort of, it is placing his life firmly in Yeskier's hands, irrespective of
Yes.
Yeskier's wishes, which is kind of not cool. But
Wait, I have a question.
Mhm.
the flowers automatically come up when you realize you're in love with someone, or is it the other way around? You
Depends
learn you
on.
love Oh, okay. You learn you love somebody when the flowers
Mhm.
occur.
It
Ooh, it
is.
could be either. Ooh,
Mhm.
fun.
It is often not so much a moment of realization of love, but a realization of, oh no, I'm in too deep.
I'm drowning in flowers.
Mhm.
Okay.
So the third fic that I find it's probably one of my favorite Hanahaki just because of how much it breaks the mold is actually in the Magnus Archives fandom, and it is called Clutching Daffodils by Gemi. It is John Martin, which
Obviously,
is
everybody's favorite.
this one is set fairly early in the series, I believe. And it's Martin who has Hanahaki for John.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is that John in canon is asexual.
Oh,
So,
is he? I don't really know much about TMA except for the things I find on Tumblr.
yeah. The really interesting thing about this fic that Gemi did was Martin decides that he is going to continue to suffer from Hanahaki, not as a means of pining or because he want and he doesn't really try to keep it a huge secret from John. He sort of incidentally does, but not a ton, and he never intends to die of it. He is going to get their magical life-saving surgery, which basically removes your ability to love at some point. But his take on it is not so much I am hopelessly in love with this person and I'm going to be sad. It's I am enjoying having physical proof of my ability to love someone unconditionally. I'm enjoying being in love. And I
Aw.
love the fact that there's a way for everybody to know that I am in love. And at some point, I'm going
Mm.
to do something to save my own life, and there is no obligation on John to return my love. None, zero. But
Okay.
while it lasts, I'm going to enjoy being in love.
But he tells John, right?
Yeah, eventually it comes out, and John is super awkward about it for a variety of reasons, including he's very asexual, so he's like, what if I don't ever want to be in love with you? And Martin is like, that's okay too. There
Wow.
is no obligation on John to ever return it. And
Wait. Is John a romantic?
in this particular fic, it is slightly unclear. He might just be demi-romantic.
Okay. Because there's a difference.
Yeah.
You can fall in love with somebody and not have sex with them.
hmm But it's interesting because there's no pressure one way or the other on him. In fact, there aren't
Oh.
even really any stakes because Martin is going to save his own life at some point. I just
Okay.
really
How does it end?
so it eventually does end with John sort of despite himself falling in love with Martin. But
Oh.
in this sort of they're both sitting at the kitchen table and Martin is like, oh, I'm cured. Oh, I'm cured. And they're like they look at each other and they're like, oh.
In the second fic you were talking about, Geralt goes to a witch asking for flowers so that he could physically represent his love to
hmm
Jaskier. I'm sorry, audience, I say Jaskier, not whatever B was saying. Um, so the author decided not to use the concept that the flowers go away when the other person is requited,
So they
or
do, but it's a variation between the two. So in the Magnus Archives one, in Clutching Daffodils, it's a as soon as the person falls in love with you, it instantly is fixed. So very magical realism. It is absolutely 100%
oh,
magic. In Fill My Lungs with Sweetness, they do get fixed, but you have to confess your love and have it be requited. So you
oh.
actually have to say the words and have the other person accept it and return it in order for you to be cured.
When you first hear about this trope, you think,
Mhm.
this seems pretty straightforward. No, the mechanics of this trope are like complex and fascinating.
Yeah, it's pretty instinctive, but it does change between fics.
Yeah, it really does. And I can really imagine it being different within each fandom and within each ship of each fandom.
I've seen it be different within the same ship in the same fandom, but different authors.
Well, I mean that's every trope. But
Yeah.
like I can see like variations kind of being decided upon for each
Mhm.
ship, like fanon wise. Wow.
It is interesting to note that this trope, when it was kind of dispersing through fandom, around the same time it was also kind of having its own dispersal through mainstream media. There's actually a really interesting situation that happened where in 2017 there was this competition called the world competition contest or world comic contest, and there was an artist who came in second place, and I apologize for butchering their name. I believe they are Korean and I have no idea how this is supposed to be pronounced, but it's, I believe, Bebong is the artist, and they wrote a comic using Hanahaki, but apparently Hanahaki has some kind of copyright law involved
Oh
with
no.
Hanahaki Otome, so they got disqualified because they had used
No.
that as a part of their comic. So weirdly, this trope is more popular in fandom, but it doesn't exist solely, especially in terms of fan art, because this is one of those ones that is actually quite popular to do fan art of, or just art of.
Where is the line between trope and story ideas? I feel like there's also a gray line between, or hazy line between, like being able to copyright a story concept or an idea versus copywriting a trope, which Hanahaki has become. I feel really sad, really bad for that, for that comic, right? Author, writer, artist. Gosh.
It is interesting
Tangent.
to note, though, that although it is niche, it does exist outside of fandom in its own way.
Yeah. So do you have a rec that would be a good, like, starter place for somebody to read?
Yeah, it is pretty quintessential. In my opinion, this is pretty much, provided you don't want a long and angsty epic or a tragedy, this is pretty much what you get.
It's Rec Corner!
So my rec this week is Daffodil Summer by Leon Hanna, and it is a Stucky Hanahaki fic. It's pretty short. It's a pretty good introduction to Hanahaki if you just want to kind of get a taste of what it's about. The story is small Steve, and him and Bucky are not superheroes, and he falls in love with Bucky and ends up getting Hanahaki right before Bucky gets shipped out.
Oh no.
And it's almost more of a rumination on him as an artist, which is really fun. That's one of the nice things about Hanahaki is they can sometimes border into this very interesting lyrical sort of storytelling territory that is fun to read. And again, it's pretty short. It's just over 5,000 words, so it will not take you very long to read. And I'm not going to spoil the end because it's pretty cute. It's not a sad one.
Now that we know that some end in tragedy and some don't, we now know it's part of the 75%. Wow, that was really fun. Thank you for steering us into the wonderful world of people throwing up flowers. That's neat.
Yeah, if you like the fine line between lyricism and body horror, yeah, this is the trope for you.
God, that's so Japanese. I love it so much. All right, I think we're done.
Yeah, I guess we'll see y'all next week.
On Fangirls Anonymous. Bye!